Hi, hello, and welcome back to my channel. So recently I uploaded a video addressing the edited anime opening that was released on Paul Gosar's Twitter account that came from somewhere out in his office in regards to Attack on Titan. And that sparked some comments and my digging a little deeper into where this narrative that Attack on Titan is pro-fascist, and thereby that the author of Attack on Titan, Hajime Isayama, I hope I said that right, is also pro-fascist. Hello, different Brina than the Brina that you are going to see throughout a lot of this video. So I initially recorded going off of a lot of things based off of memory of what I remember about the show. But because it's been so long since I watched it, I actually did some more research into the episodes that have aired, so I could make stronger points. I'm still going to leave a lot of the initial recording here, and I'm just going to clarify a few things. First off, before we dive into the plot of the show and the storyline, I realize that it may actually be important to take some time to define fascism as an ideology so that we're all on the same page at the start of it, at least, even if we come to different conclusions about what the message of Attack on Titan leaves us with later on. But before I do that, I wanted to invite everyone here to please sign and share a petition to save Youngstown State University's Center for Holocaust Studies. It's actually located here in my home state. And coincidentally enough, I think the day after I was originally going to release this video, I received an email for this petition, so that's kind of why it came on my radar. As quoted from the email I received from Action Network, the threatened center closure is a part of Youngstown University's admin's unnecessary neoliberal playbook purge of public education by threatening cuts to programs and faculty. Under the guise of budget deficits, while refusing faculty union calls for assessing possible cuts to budgets for resource training, athletics, and top-heavy administration salaries. Local Ohio Education Association reps refer to the so-called budget deficit as a manufactured crisis created to justify cuts punitive in nature after the faculty union won a 2020 strike. The link to sign this petition will be at the very top of the description of this video, so if you want to pause and go sign that, that would be great. I'll give you time. Go ahead. Okay. Now, let's talk about defining fascism. So it's an ideology that has multiple components, and its roots come from a very specific time and place, that being the events of World War I and then the aftermath leading into World War II. It actually originated in Italy in 1919 from Mussolini, who first coined the term to describe his political movement and create a fascist state. While there are certain elements in history that I think can't really fully be replicated in modern times, there are certain elements that can be, I think, abstracted from that time period and are reflective of current political leanings, specifically when it comes to the extremist radical alt-right. It stems from this idea of remaking a nation, seeking power, and maintaining that power no matter the cost. Nationalism is also a huge part of it, which is the loyalty of any individual to a nation under the guise of unity. In America, it can be similar, if not indistinguishable, from what we would call patriotism in the US. But the big difference here is nationalism is built on around an idea that you must dominate other countries and have a specific display of superiority of that nation. And it often, if not all times, is dependent on violence, as it pushes the support of one nation over the interest of any other. Far-right authoritarianism is also a huge part of it. There's also the concept of seeking territorial expansion at all cost. So taking land that doesn't belong to you. There will generally be forced suppression of opposition. And while these all are individual parts that make up fascism, I think what it really comes down to is that all of these parts are sought through violence and brutality and war and creating this new superior man or race, and the idea that those superior have the authority to rule over lesser people, which of course leads to violence and oppression of marginalized groups. And it just kind of depends on where this ideology is taking place for what group they decide are inferior. So to be clear, even though a lot of these little parts make up fascism and aren't necessarily fascism by themselves, ultimately, if you look at like authoritarianism, for example, the only way to achieve that is through violence, which is why I think we equate it to fascism, because it really can't be achieved by any sort of peaceful means, which makes it cruel and evil. So now that all that's said, I'm going to send you back over to past Brina, and you will see me again in a little bit. I was honestly boggled by this and taken aback because I had no idea that this narrative was going around or that it had been popularized. There are certainly some things that I feel need to be addressed that from where I stand right now, I vehemently disagree with the narratives that are going around. Firstly, I want to address the accusations against the author. I am really confused when you take the art out of it and we just focus on the author, where this narrative is coming from. Because from the research I did, and please correct me if I'm wrong, if anyone else can find anything that I missed, but this seems to be stemming from a rumor that had originally started in 2013, a rumor that stated that the author had been defending Japanese military actions in Korea. But even though that is being said, there is no screenshot, there is no evidence of this. It appears to have just been a rumor. I'm very confused because I can't find anything that's actually demonstrating that ever happened. And this rumor seems to be recirculating because in light of, although the manga is complete, the TV show is obviously still in the works, and the final part of the last season has not been aired yet. So some people are still behind, people like myself, when it comes to the completion of the storyline. There was also an article circulating that sparked some outrage. I believe it was written by Tom Speelman in a Polygon article that was written back in 2019 that is now recirculating. And due to all of this, I felt like I needed to clarify my thoughts about things, because it's almost like if you associate yourself with the series as a fan, there's the question of, am I guess, supporting or standing behind content that is pro-fascist and racist? And obviously, I have a problem with that because that's not how I feel at all. And so therefore I felt like I needed to clarify my interpretations of the story and also reevaluate what my interpretations were. Now, some of this is going to be, a lot of this is just going to be me talking about some things from memory. But eventually what I would also like to do is maybe not do a reaction to the series, but I planned on rewatching anyway. I've mentioned this before. I have ADHD. When I first watched the series, I watched it with the original audio and the English subtitles, but that results in me sometimes missing a lot of the information. So I had already planned on rewatching it with the English dub so that I could catch things that I missed just for my own enjoyment. In light of me doing that, I was thinking about doing sort of a review on maybe either each episode or each couple of episodes or each half season or each season. We'll just kind of see where it goes from there and sort of reevaluate my stance and re-answer the question that I'm going to address in this video, which is Attack on Titan pro-fascist? Right now, I am against that. I do not think that that's where this is coming from at all, and I am pretty confused on how that is being portrayed, and I would like to clarify my reasons for why I'm confused. I spoke about this vaguely in the video before. The series focuses on specifically Eren Yeager and his friends, Mikasa and Armin, and these people who are scouts and are working with the military essentially inside these walls to try to defeat the Titans who have repeatedly terrorized them, which is why they live behind the walls. These walls in some circles of these cities are actually worshipped like gods, because a lot of these people no longer remember their history and think that these walls almost just emerged there, like that the walls are in fact gods. You find out later on that these people were essentially cursed to not remember their own history. I'm not going to dive too far into that because I don't think I will get the history accurate, because again, it is a lot of information to try to put into one video. And so I am just going to try to summarize the basics and my feelings about the series. You find out later that the power that these titans have, first off, the main character has a power of a titan, Eren Yeager. He can turn into a titan essentially, but he is not mindless like some of the titans are. There's a certain amount of titans that have specific powers as far as intelligence and also other powers associated with that. They gain these powers by eating another person that has these titan abilities. There's one titan, for example, that has like a hardening ability with their skin, or actually I think all titans technically have that ability, but there's one specifically, the armor titan, that is extremely armored in strength and protecting their body with armor. There's a colossal titan, which is an extremely large titan. There's like the beast titan. There's a bunch of different types of titans, and you gain these powers by eating that titan, and then those powers will carry down to you.
Hi, editing Brina here. I also just wanted to clarify that I will be putting up some of the manga strips from the books to highlight some of the quotes from certain characters that I feel like are important to what I am saying in the video. So I highly recommend that you pause and read so that you have time to take in the context that these images provide to the points that I am going to be making throughout the video.
Now, the issue that a lot of people are seeing is that, and even comments that I had under my last video, is someone had said, isn't it true that marginalized groups of people are being portrayed as these monsters, these demons, these beasts? Because you find out that the Eldians, which is what Eren Yeager is, have these abilities, and they have been abused and marginalized and referred to as devils and beasts because of it. You particularly find this out when the world grows bigger, as you find out that there's a society and nations outside of the walls that force Eldians that live there to wear badges on their arms, and do certain work, live a certain way. They have certain rules, and most of them end up joining the army to try to fight, basically fight a war with the people on the island. You also find out that they essentially turned some of these Eldians into titans, into these mindless beasts, using a serum that comes from, I believe from the spinal serum, and sort of kick them off to terrorize the people on this island that are hiding behind the walls. From my understanding, as I said before, it was to keep the Eldians that live there sort of imprisoned into this island because they are more focused and terrified of the titans that are terrorizing them to ever venture outside of their walls. And the people that live there, most of the people, the citizens, are not aware that this other society outside of this that these other people even exist, and they don't know their own history. Now, I think a main point that needs to be made here when people are talking about, isn't it true that marginalized groups are being portrayed as these beasts? Because the Eldians have these power of the titans, and because they are demonized because of that. What you see play out in the series is your main characters are these titans. They are Eldians. Everyone on this island is an Eldian. You find out later that people that infiltrated these walls that are from the outside city, that their friends and colleagues don't know that this is where they're from, and they are working with a society that is demonized Eldians. They are also Eldians. So they are most of, like, I think like all the main characters that I remember are Eldians. Your villains are even Eldians. And that's one of the darker themes of the series that you've come to find. And for me, it's I don't know how you can interpret it as being pro-fascist, because to me, it's about the toll that prejudice, demonization of groups of people, and nationalism has on people in a deeper way, because you see your villains that come forward in the series, when you realize this hatred that they have for themselves, because of the brainwashing and the way that they were taught, and they are seen to demonize their own people. It's so heartbreaking to see, and it is dark and it is uncomfortable. There's an episode, I believe at the beginning of the fourth season, where you go back and you see, and again, this is going to be complicated for people that haven't seen the show. I'm going to have trouble correctly articulating all of the plot lines because there's so much. But there's a flashback episode, I believe at the beginning of season 4, where you see where Eren's dad came from. And you find out that the main character, Eren, his dad actually came from outside of the walls. And he came from this city. And you see his experience as a child and how he was treated by his oppressors, by the people that made him wear a badge on his arm to mark him as an Eldian. You see, and these people are called the Marleyans. You witness Marleyan soldiers murder his sister because they snuck out because they wanted to see, I can't remember what it was, but they snuck out where they weren't supposed to be because they wanted to see something. And when he was taken home, these soldiers murdered his little sister. And these Marleyan soldiers. So it boggles my mind that anyone could come out of this series thinking that the Marleyans are the heroes. That's not to say everything's black and white. The reason it's not black and white is because they are using people from this marginalized group to brainwash them into hating their own people. And the reason they hate their own people is because they believe they are paying retribution for themselves for the atrocities that they have been taught that they did throughout human history. As far as I'm aware, and what is displayed later on in season 4, is they weren't taught their history correctly. It's almost like this urban legend, like religion almost. Like they're paying retribution for something that they did, that their ancestors did as Titans. Like they're paying for the sins of the father from, thousands of years ago. And again, what was really dark for me to witness is just seeing the battle that you see these Eldians that grew up in Marleyan territory facing because they have been taught to hate themselves. And then they come to this island and they realize that these aren't devils, that these are just people. They become their colleagues and they have to fight this battle of like what right and wrong, and staying true to what their purpose was when they were sent to that island by Marleyan soldiers, and realizing that they might be the bad guys, and that not only might they be the bad guys, but they might have been used, lied to, and it's so tragic, and it's sad, and it's dark. It's extremely dark to watch. I thought now may be a good point to share this clip with you from the Attack on Titan series. It depicts Eldians that are in Marley, so Eldians that have been brainwashed into justifying their own abuse, are welcoming back a character, Reiner, who initially we believe to be a citizen of Paradise Island, along with all of our other main characters, but he was one of the aliens who were used to betray them to infiltrate the military on Paradise Island. The reason I think this scene is important is because it really depicts how these people have been so brainwashed into thinking that the Eldians on Paradise Island are evil, devils, monsters. And when Reiner is confronted with what he experienced there, the horrors that he must have experienced, he names off very simplistic, normal human traits. To me, it's meant to point out how the Eldians of Paradise Island are just, in fact, regular people. And you can see the look of shock horror on his friends and family's faces. I'm gonna play it and I'll let you guys see.
お前でさえ島の悪魔から逃げるのがやっとだったんだろ。
ダメだよお父さん。凶悪で残虐な悪魔たちの住む島に5年も潜入してたんだよ。
いや、話せることもある。入隊式の最中、突然芋を食い出した奴がいた。教官が咎めると悪びれる様子もなく答えた。うまそうだから盗んだと。そんな悪党だが、さすがにまずいと思ったのか。芋を半分譲ると言った。しかし、 差し出した芋は半分には到底満たないものだった。奴らに譲り合う精神などないからな。本当にどうしようもない奴らだった。便所に入るなりどっちを出しに来たのかを忘れるバカだったり、自分のことしか考えてねえ不真面目な奴に、人のことばっかり考えるクソ真面目な奴、突っ走るしか頭にねえ奴に、何があってもついていく奴らだったり、それにいろんな奴らがいて、そこに俺たちもいた。そこにいた日々はまさに地獄だった。少し話しすぎた。忘れてくれ。
いろんな奴らって何？悪い奴らでしょ。
So the reason I wanted to share that clip with you guys is because you're seeing how the brainwashing and propaganda has really taken hold of the Eldians on Marley, including Reiner, who was used as a child soldier at the age of 12 to go to Paradise Island and infiltrate their military. When they ask him what happened, and he provides all of these really mundane things, you see this look of shock on his family's faces, because I think this is the first time many of them are hit with this question of, as you see Gabby ask, what do you mean there were all kinds of people there? They're bad though, right? And you also really see Reiner battle this within himself because of the lies and abuse that has befallen upon him, his family, and his fellow Eldians by the Marleyan government. It's interesting to me, like looking back on it, thinking about how in the first season, you sort of hate these Titans. You think they're just like beasts, like zombies, and they're just going around and eating people and massacring people and no rhyme or reason. Why are they doing this? And to find out later on that it's something that they all carry within them and they are eating each other. It's like, to me, it sort of represents this, what we see in marginalized groups when we are pitted against each other and we start harming people within our own group. And that's just my interpretation of it, right? Which is the beauty of art. It's my interpretation.
Thinking back on what I said here, I also wonder if the concept of Titans being humans that are trapped inside Titan form and mindlessly eating people, I also wonder if it could be representation of just the mindless violence and atrocities as a whole that we have seen throughout humanity, involving multiple different cultures and multiple different people.
And then you see Eren go from absolutely hating Titans, and also keep in mind, when he hated Titans, he thought that they were just Titans. Like, there is that you see them slowly start to come to this realization that they aren't just Titans and that there might be people trapped inside of these bodies that were cursed in this way. So when I first started making recordings for this video, I initially wanted to steer clear of making any direct comparisons to historical events. But I realized that my overall opinion and interpretation of the show would be stronger if I directly address some of the most commonly deduced parallels to human history throughout the Attack on Titan series. As I said earlier, in doing this, I had to dive back into some of the specifics of the show that I had forgotten or missed initially due to it, being nearly a year since I watched the last episode air. And that is why you are watching this video a lot later than I initially intended. I do ask that we keep in mind that allegories in fiction are not meant to be equal or literal. I do not personally believe in this context that it is meant to serve as a supernatural retelling of any specific time or culture in human history, but rather be its own unique storyline that plays on elements that we have witnessed, and in some cases are still witnessing. As a whole, I view Isayama's work as an original piece of fiction, highlighting the horrors and the endless cycle of taught prejudice, brutality, and war. With that said, I'm sure many of you have heard or deduced the most blatant parallel in the show, which appears in the form of Marley being a fascist regime, with the primary goal of their government being the gaining and holding of power against and at the expense of all other nations, to achieve aggressive territorial expansion through glorified militarization and nationalism by the way of exploitation, discrimination, and abuse of the Eldian people. Most viewers, or people that have just maybe heard of the show and read about it, believe this to be a direct reflection of the treatment of the Jewish people in Germany during the Second World War. And because of that aspect in the series, many have tried to force all of the events of World War II into the show, absent of whether or not the pieces actually fit the storyline. Because the Marleyan-Eldian dynamic in the show is so glaringly obvious. Okay, but here's where things get really messy and even more baffling and just downright scary and horrific. Before I dive into the abyss that is the alt-right supremacist echo chambers that have emerged amongst the westernized Attack on Titan fan base, I want to be clear in that their warped perceptions and blind prejudice have absolutely zero basis in reality. So much so that even the fascists on 4chan can't agree on their own self-inserted oppression, fetishization fantasies. As far as I can tell, there seem to be two main factions of this fan base. There are the anti-Semitic fascist shitstains who push the narrative that it's actually the Marleyans the audience is truly meant to sympathize with, which completely boggles my mind, as I've said multiple times throughout the first recording I did of this video. And then there's the white supremacist fascist shitstains who view the Marleyans as foreign invaders and the Eldians as the oppressed white people being suppressed by other white people, but they're foreign white people. Oh, okay. This is basically just what happens when playing the victim in real life falls short. So they have to resort to fiction to satisfy their perverse daydreams. Because that's exactly what this is. Fascists, in their warped reality, see themselves as both the victim and the superior. And because that isn't an actual reflection of reality, they will force these narratives wherever they can reach. And this is especially true in fiction. In terms of Attack on Titan, some of these fascists view the Eldians as superior beings due to their Titan abilities that have been suppressed and stolen by their inferiors, being the Marleyans, while the other fascists see the Eldians as devils, as the Marleyans call them, that deserve their lot in life because they believe the historical revisions the Marleyans have created and blamed Eldians for events that supposedly happened centuries before them. And therein lies the problem. It is shockingly easy for internet fascists to shove their ideologies onto any fictional work, especially fictional works that are depicting the brutalities of prejudice and war, because dangerous people are always going to find ways to promote dangerous falsehoods and lies. This is also true for any nation and culture, which is why these conspiracy theories don't stop at anti-Semitism or white supremacism. Again, I also want to reiterate that fascist regimes, prejudice, racism, nationalism, and war being depicted in fiction does not equate to an advocacy of those things in reality. It all comes down to the human experiences of the characters and the stories that are being told, not the setting of it. So let's talk a little bit more of the story of Attack on Titan. Beyond the obvious demonstrations of fascism within the Marleyan society by way of their direct treatment and discrimination of Eldian citizens, there are other echoes of fascist ideologies as well, which is why I wanted to make sure that we define fascism at the beginning of this video. So for one, the nationalism exhibited on Marley is vastly different from the patriotism we are used to seeing amongst our main Eldian protagonists from the beginning of the show. I say this because up until season 4, our main characters on Paradise Island are unaware that other nations even exist. So it's not exactly possible for its citizens to prioritize the interest of their nation at the expense of other countries or marginalized groups because they don't know that these other places even exist yet. That is not to say that the royal government that was on Paradise Island wasn't corrupt. It in fact was, which is why we see our Eldian protagonist of the show overthrow their own government and expose the truth of what exists beyond the walls. The walls that were once worshipped as divine protectors and gods now look more and more like a cage or prison, which is what once protagonist Eren Yeager felt all along. These plot points really seem to demonstrate, to me at least, that Isayama isn't glorifying corrupt forms of government or fascism just by allowing them to exist throughout the story. That sentiment feels more evident to me, again, when our main characters become more and more knowledgeable of the atrocities happening to their fellow Eldians outside the walls of Paradise Island at the hands of Marley, which, in direct contrast to the Eldians of Paradise Island, the Marleyans of Marley have actively prioritized their own special interest at the expense of others. And I'm not just talking about against the Eldians. That actually includes other nations and countries that exist around Marleyan territory, because Marley isn't the only nation that exists outside the walls of Paradise Island. Demonstrated in the way that Marleyans have stolen the power of 9 titans. You know, those select few intelligent titans with specialized powers and abilities that I mentioned earlier, and how the Eldians of Marley are forced into the Marleyan army? That's because they use Eldians specifically to turn them into pure titans, which are the mindless sort of titans, so that the Marleyans can feed them the human form of an Eldian with the power to turn into one of the 9 titans and abstract that power that they carry in order for Marley to stay the world's superpower, basically by strengthening their military and aiding their never-ending quest for domination. For reference, I'm pretty certain that Marley had already appropriated 7 of the 9 titans when we were first introduced to their existence. And they had been using and abusing the Eldians of Marley to do so, which is another reason why they refused to leave the Eldians of Paradise Island alone, because it wasn't enough for them to just have 7, and it wouldn't have never been enough until they gained control of them all. And what exactly do we think they would do with that power if they were to ever get it? Probably the same thing they've been doing, and worse. Whatever the hell they want in the interest of Marleyans and Marleyans alone. And that would likely include an eventual mass genocide of the Eldians on Paradise Island. Which reminds me, in case I wasn't clear before, the Eldians aren't just out here with all this power festering in their bodies, turning into titans at will. Only 9 titans have the power to transform from human to titan to back again. And the mindless or pure titans that you see are stuck in their titan form and cursed that way at the hands of Marleyan soldiers who turned them into that against their will. The only way they would ever gain their intelligence back or their self-awareness back were to be if they were to consume a human that has one of the 9 titan abilities. Which is why the majority of the titans you see on the show, especially through the beginning series, don't have any self-awareness of what they're doing, and their only goal is to just eat other human beings. The Eldians of Paradise Island, and Marley for that matter, just want to be left in peace, free to live safe, fulfilling lives that they deserve. Marley has refused to leave them alone, again to the extent that they turned Marleyan Eldians that they viewed as traitors into these pure titans against their will to send them off to terrorize the Eldians of Paradise Island, keeping them imprisoned on that land, trapped inside their walls. And that brings me to another striking difference that we see throughout the series: the militarization of Marleyan citizens. So war in Marleyan society is glorified. It's glorified because violence and brutality are a necessity for them to remain the world's superpower and dominate over all other nations and countries surrounding them. The exploitation and militarization of Eldian people is idolized because of the historical revision and propaganda fed to them by the Marley government against the Eldian people, who have been in turn brainwashed into thinking that they must be redeemed for the supposed sins of their ancestors by bringing honor to the country of Marley, and the only way that they are taught how: war. Now, on the other hand, if you go back to the very first through the 3rd seasons of the show, when we only knew of the humanity that existed behind the walls of Paradise Island, the Eldian soldiers, known as scouts, who went out to explore the lands and fight titans outside the walls, are not glorified at all. In fact, the life of being a soldier amongst their society is depicted as wasteful and miserable, filled with senseless loss, death, and grief. Even the loyalty that we see amongst our main protagonist or heroes of the story ultimately comes down to a sense of devotion to their loved ones and the friends that they fight beside. It's not a blind loyalty to the nation itself, which is exactly why, as I said before, they overthrow their own government. Now let's talk about Eren Yeager. You see him going from hating the Titans for murdering his mother, and he in the first episode, he watched his mother get gruesomely devoured by a Titan. And then it goes from that to learning more about the history and the outside world. And then it's almost like Eren goes from hating the Titans to hating Marleyans, the oppressors of the story, because he infiltrates the society and he sees what they've done to his people, to the Eldians. So he rightfully is angry and hates them. But then as the story even progresses further, his goals, which haven't completely come to light yet, at least not for me. I have seen spoilers for the end of the manga, but I don't want to speak on that because I'm not 100% sure, and I think I will misspeak because I only read a little bit. I don't know the full context of how the story ends. But you see how it almost goes to him hating his oppressors to hating humanity as a whole because it's like he sees no end to the atrocities and to the way that humans have demonized each other and hurt each other and the pain and the never-ending war. And it's almost like that's manifested into a pure hatred of humanity itself. And you originally see him seeming to just want to kill all of the Marleyans, the oppressors, and then it almost seems like it's getting a little muddied, like is he just going to try to destroy everybody in his anger? And that hasn't fully come to light yet, what his entire goal is throughout the series and what he wants to do. And when I said in my last video that some of it depicts being pro-genocide, I was talking about the internalized self-hatred the Eldians can have for themselves, specifically the Eldians that were raised in Marleyan culture, and also Eren for wanting to also, in revenge, kill the oppressors that have hurt his people. To me, it signifies this never-ending cycle of abuse and hatred that can happen when there is no end in sight to your revenge. Now, even though that can paint the main character Eren Yeager as becoming a villain, it's not that black and white because we don't really know what his entire purpose is. And also, all of your main characters that you are rooting for from the very beginning, his friends Mikasa and Armin specifically, and there is more, I'm not going to get into naming every single person in the series, they are also Eldians. They also have this power of being a Titan. And in order to say that this show is pro-fascist, you would have to come out of it saying that the Marleyans are being depicted as heroes. And I don't know how you can get that because they are not the main characters of the story in any sense of the word, even outside of Eren Yeager. And the ones that were main characters, they were also Eldians that were a product of this abuse and this racism or speciesism in this context. So I don't know how you can come away from this show thinking that the Marleyans are the heroes of the story. It boggles my mind. I don't know how you can see it that way. So I guess I'm just kind of left a little confused by all of this. You know, I even had a conversation with somebody in my comments that they had mentioned that they felt sad because without ever watching the series, they bought into these rumors, which is like, of course, like it's easy to do that because if you hear that something is problematic, you don't want to put yourself through watching it when it's like that, which is also why if I do a review of the series, I don't want to do a reaction because it's not like I'm sitting here saying you have to watch the entire show to understand. But I do think context in this scenario, it does matter. Nuance does exist in this show. And just because certain depictions of human history are being represented does not mean that they are being endorsed. In an interview, it has been reported that the author of Attack on Titan, Hajime Isayama, has said, "The movie In This Corner of the World doesn't explicitly answer the question of, is war a bad thing? And I think this is quite innovative. For example, in order to express the notion that discrimination is bad, it first demonstrates existing prejudices, then dives into the recognition of this mindset, and then examines the opposing view. This makes the audience exclaim, 'Whoa,' and understand the logic of it all. I'm also hoping to implement this storytelling method so that my readers can sympathize with the suffering of the characters." Now, to me, I believe Eren Yeager is a character representation of what Isayama wanted to achieve in this work. The reason I say that is because Eren seems to be the embodiment and consequence of the horrors of war and how the harsh, never-ending cycle of hatred and vengeance can twist a person's humanity into something nearly unrecognizable. As the audience, I believe we're meant to be left feeling betrayed by him as the once protagonist, just as Eren betrayed those characters closest and dearest to him. From that very first episode, Eren was always a little bit of an idiot, at times acting without thinking and prone to letting his anger get the best of him, even as a spoiled child with a tendency to throw tantrums, as children often do. But as he grows older and his experiences shape him through the tragic impact of loss and grief and violence against his people, it really takes hold of him in ways that there may be no turning back from. I can't really say for sure without knowing how the rest of the story plays out, since I haven't read the manga, so I can't speak on what will become of Eren Yeager, because his true intentions and purpose may not have been fully revealed to us yet. But I can say that his methods of defeating his oppressors and potentially wiping out all of humanity in the process is not something that is praised by his once allies or any of the main characters we have been following since the beginning at all, despite what some of the internet fascists might have you believe. By the end of our last aired episode, it truly seems like our main Eldian heroes, including Armin and Mikasa, will be pitted against him in the end, as he rises to becoming the antagonist of the final episodes to come.
A criticism that I would like to mention, and something that I noticed, I remember noticing when I first started watching the show, is that all of the main characters are predominantly white, with the exception of the Ackermans, like Mikasa and Levi, who are of Asian descent. And it is set in a very, I guess, European-like society. I do wish that we had more people of color, but I also wonder if that could have been to the author's benefit, because the Titans are not seen in a positive light throughout the series. Until you find out that they are actually Eldians that are trapped inside of these bodies. At the beginning, they are regarded as these, something separate from human, in fact, not human at all, and just seen as being these, terrifying, frightening creatures with no humanity in them and nothing human about them. I do think that if he did design the Eldians to have more black characters, I wonder if that could also end up being problematic. If he ended up depicting people of color as being these titans, I would find also that concerning, and then the author could be criticized for exactly what he is being accused of now. I feel like there is probably an answer there that would allow for more diverse characters in terms of ethnicity. I don't know what the right answer is here, but I did want to address that and offer my thoughts on it.
Now I want to get into talking about some of the comments I got where people were sort of criticizing me for, I mistakenly implied that you should never make connections between fiction and the real world, and that's not what I meant at all. Meant was that you have to be really careful when taking allegories in fiction, and specifically taking those allegories and then turning it into what you think is a political ad. But also you do have to be careful in making these direct comparisons, because allegories are not meant to be 1 = 1. Like, they're not equivalent, and in any artwork that is supernatural, you are likely always going to find themes of prejudice built in when you have a supernatural species living in natural society, essentially. Like, from my perspective as a writer, if I wrote a supernatural series, I would probably play with ideas of discrimination against people for certain religious beliefs, discriminations against people for being who they are. And that could be coming from my own experiences as, a queer person. But somebody else could take that and they might relate it to their own experience being a person of color, which I am not. Because these things can be interpreted differently depending on who is reading the work. And therefore, it's easy to find things that could potentially be offensive. It means that these allegories, they don't fit perfectly in human history because they can't. It is meant to be its own story. Fiction plays on themes that we see throughout history and human experiences, and then creates its own world to depict those things and to evoke those emotions. And I think in order not to be disconnected from the reality that we live in, I don't think it is going to be a good decision to make an outright claim or metaphor of what a piece of artwork is saying. And I especially don't think it's okay to use this piece of fiction as some sort of argument into a political sense and into politics. Now, going back to the author, Hajime Isayama, some other things I heard in my comments that I found particularly concerning was people were talking about why it is particularly dangerous and unsettling that there is a Japanese author depicting these types of narratives and themes. I'm just concerned by that because there's a lot of things in American history that we haven't addressed either, including certain concentration camps of marginalized groups of people of color. So it doesn't seem fair to me to use that as an argument on the basis of somebody's nationality. I understand that how corrupt a specific government is. I understand how corrupt our government is. But when you're talking about a person of color and you're judging their artwork and you're saying that this must be what they're saying, just on the basis of these are some of the themes in the show, and therefore the author must be a fascist because of where he comes from. That's concerning to me. I don't really like that at all. And I'm not saying that there can't be problems. I am not even saying, because I don't know really anything else about Hajime Isayama besides his artwork. So I'm not saying that he doesn't have any problematic beliefs, especially based on the society that he grows up in. I'm sure he does. I'm sure he at least has had problematic beliefs. I certainly have. But I'm also not going to, I think it's dangerous to outright make a claim that somebody should not be supported because of their nationality. I can't get behind that. Again, to clarify, I was not saying that you can't draw parallels between human history and fiction. But I think there's a lack of nuance that exists when a lot of people attempt to do that. And they attempt to just skip over the fact that these are allegories and that they are not made to fit perfectly. Are some of the parallels in Attack on Titan dark and vile and uncomfortable? Yes, they are. That is not an endorsement of the vile atrocities that have happened in human history. It greatly saddens me that has been the message that a lot of people have taken away, either without watching the show or bad actors who are fans of the show who are forcing their personal beliefs into the artwork, which says more about their beliefs and not Isayama's message when he wrote the story. It's also very clear to me that, Isayama is taking these allegories and creating his own story and universe, which is what good fiction storytelling does. It creates something that is completely new and complex to portray the themes and the message that Isayama intends to leave the audience with, which to me, and I'll actually just read a comment that I had left on one of my community posts about this. I had said, it's difficult when fiction work has such dark themes to it, and it's easy for people to decide this must be what the work is saying on the basis of the author's nationality, rather than diving into what the themes of the show/manga are throughout the series. I do not personally take away that it is pro-fascist in any sense of the word, but rather dives into the toll prejudices take against marginalized groups who grow up in a society intent on demonizing them until they eventually can't help but demonize themselves. My takeaway was the fight to overcome top prejudice and hatred, even when it's against your own group. How the path to revenge can unintentionally continue the cycle of hatred and coming to terms with the atrocities in human history. This is especially apparent to me when the main protagonist goes from having a hatred for Titans after losing his home and family to realizing himself that he is, in fact, a Titan as an Eldian and exactly what he grew to hate, and then going outside the walls, learning where he came from, and hating the other humans, the Marleyans in this case, that brought them to that point by perpetuating abuse and prejudice to other Eldians like him for having the ability to transform into Titans, and for what they have been taught that their ancestors did centuries before them. We then see Eren ultimately going down this path towards being the villain because their anger and hatred for their oppressors seems to have turned into a hatred for humanity as a whole, for the never-ending cycle of destruction, which is something I particularly relate to because I feel like we've all seen, as an American, some of the things that I have seen, especially in my recent adult years in the middle of this pandemic. It can leave you feeling hopeless and feeling like there is no end in sight, and that the fight is never going to end. And it can leave you just feeling really just distrusting of humanity as a whole, and just our species and our own capabilities and our worth as a species. Again, the series hasn't concluded yet, and I don't know exactly where it's going to end up, but I do not at all believe that it would be factual to say that the Marleyans of this story are the heroes. I don't see that at all. Again, the main characters and this people that you are focused on in this story, they are all Eldians. And to me, it is all about their struggles to live and survive in this world, being who they are, and the top prejudice that they have internalized against their own people. I guess that's it. I don't know that I really have much else to say on the matter, at least not as of right now. For those of you that are interested in me doing a review of the series as I'm rewatching it, let me know in the comments so that I know that there are people that are going to be interested in that. And yeah, just be careful not to associate just because somebody enjoys a piece of art to immediately think that they must be endorsing some horrible atrocity in human history. The whole thing makes me a little sad. I definitely don't want to be supporting or promoting any series that is pushing harmful ideologies. I don't believe that that's what's happening here. I am open to being educated and being proven wrong, but I think we also have to remember that this is fiction, and we shouldn't automatically be placing people into boxes based on what fiction they have enjoyed and how they interpreted stories, especially when there is so much nuance involved and when people can interpret art in a million different ways. And when it's okay to admit that you enjoyed a series, like Harry Potter, for example, and no longer support the person behind it. I don't think that's the case in this instance because, again, I have not seen any evidence of Isayama being a fascist or pro-fascism beyond people coming to conclusions based on presumptions about his work and, quite frankly, judgments of where he comes from and his nationality. So yeah, I hope you guys can further this discussion in the comments. Please be kind to one another and constructive in your criticism, and I will catch you in the next one.
Special voice shout out to my top patron, Queen of Beams, my Rice Crisp Snacks, Phelan S. and Birdie, and my mod mates, Courtney, Laura A., Sarah Z., and Elaine C.